Hi, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started now. My name is Ann Catamenos. I'm the Senior Director of Development, and my role, first of all, is to thank all of you who are here with us today. Most of you are wonderful supporters, and this event was designed to thank you and to bring you a little bit behind the scenes into some of the exciting programming that we have in store for you in the future when we're able to bring them concerts back to you. So first of all, thank you so much to everybody. I hope you have a cool beverage at hand. For those of us in the Bay Area, it's another whopper of a heat wave day. Um, I also just want to say a few words of thanks, first of all, to Bruce Crisp, who's, you won't be seeing him much, but he's co-pilot with me on Zoom today. So there's Bruce, thanks. He's also a member of our trombone
Hey,
section.
everybody. Great to see you all.
Principal of our trombone section.
Yeah, Bruce is responsible for the wonderful captions on the videos that you'll be seeing later. And I'm awfully grateful to have some tech support. Also, Ty Walker in my office, thank you so much for all your help with managing invites and also behind the scenes tech stuff. Thanks, of course, to our guest artists who you'll meet in a little bit. But first, I'd like to hand this over to Maestro Michael Morgan to get us going. Hi, Michael.
Hi, hello everyone. It's great to see all the faces I know. Actually, in this business, it's even better to see faces I don't know. Love to see new faces and to put names with faces where I've seen the name, but you know, I'm old. It's hard to keep them both all together. Today, we're going to talk about the process of commissioning a new piece. And I'm really here just to give you the background, since basically it's usually my decision what gets commissioned and why. Generally what happens is composers come to me with ideas all the time. And by all the time, I mean all the time. I'm hearing from composers 24/7, 365, all the time. And so it takes a bit for one to break through. One of them that broke through was Marty Rokeach, because Amy Leichhardt commissioned him to write a piccolo concerto for her, which, if you've been following our Repast series, was just actually added to that series on our website, so you could hear the rebroadcast of that. And it was one of these. It's very rare that an orchestra member comes to me and says, "I have I'm having this concerto written for me." And I think that when orchestra players take that kind of initiative, in all but the most extreme cases, and by extreme cases, I mean they come to me with maybe a 5-hour-long contrabassoon concerto, but in all but the most extreme cases, we want to play it because we want to reward the initiative. So she came to me with this Marty Rokeach piccolo concerto, which was quite successful, quite impressive. And out of that, Marty then talked to me about writing this oratorio. And I hear there's a lot of questions about what exactly is an oratorio. Oratorio basically is an opera without the sets, costumes, and walking around. The singers are it's like a concert opera. Which differentiates it from staged opera and also differentiates it from liturgical pieces like masses and the like. Although an oratorio can be a liturgical piece also, think of Messiah of Handel, which is also an oratorio. But he came with the idea of writing an oratorio on this Flint, Michigan sit-down strike, which was one of the beginnings of the United Auto Workers. Now, at the Oakland Symphony, we're all about new music, but new music that's actually supporting a social cause or a cause that's in the news, or talking about something that's in the news, is even more important to us. So it's pretty much a no-brainer to want to, you have a composer you like who's writing on a subject that's of interest. And I'm going to let him talk about Rebecca Engler, who is helping him write it. But that's really the genesis of how a piece like this starts. And then once I have commissioned the composer, I pretty much stay out of the way and let them do what they are going to do. And I say that because, you know, it's the ever popular box of chocolates, in that you never know what you're going to get. So because as a composer, sometimes you could like everything they've ever written up to the point where you commission them, and just about the time you commission them, they decide, I'm going off in a new direction. Well, great. And if that turns out, then we're all good. But you have to trust that their new direction will be something that you will like, or something that will be in the ballpark, in the range. So I have complete faith in Marty to come up with a piece that is to the point and meets the restrictions that we give in terms of time, of length and orchestration. And then I just stand back and we do some fundraising to support it, as you all know, because that's what we need. We need help doing this. We're not in a position where we can just pay people to write music, although we would love to be able to just do that. And so with all of that, and I'm around through this whole thing, so if anyone wants to write a question in the chat, I'll be keeping an eye on that also. But I'm going to turn it over to Martin Rokic to talk about this particular piece.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you for that introduction. And I just want to confirm that everybody can hear me. Yes? Can you hear me? Okay. Very excited and grateful for this commission to write this oratorio. I'll say I just adore the Oakland Symphony and their amazing music director, Michael Morgan, and I'm so excited to be writing this. And it is the most important project of my career. So thank you so much. And I'll just, to tell the audience here, and thank you for coming, just a few basics about this oratorio. There's just a few facts to know. It took place in 1937. It was a strike between auto workers, as Michael mentioned, and General Motors. And at that time, General Motors was the largest corporation in the world. They were the equivalent of, picture 2,000 workers taking on Microsoft or Google, and you'll get a sense of the scope of this. It was a fairly new labor tactic, innovative, called a sit-down strike. The strikers did not picket in front of the plant. They actually sat down inside the plant and occupied it. In fact, it is the origins of the Occupy movement that Oakland has become so familiar with over the last, say, 8 or 9 years. They occupied that plant in Flint, Michigan for 44 long days and nights. It was very dramatic. It left the city of Flint and expanded to the whole country. It became a national event. And in fact, there were internet journalists from all kinds of countries stationed in Flint during much of that strike. Eventually they won, and that was not just the strengthening of the United Auto Workers, but it was this was the most important strike in American history, and it was the founding of the blue-collar middle class. If you ever knew somebody that worked in a factory or had a blue-collar job that could afford a modest house or send a child to college or take a modest vacation somewhere, that ability to live with a little dignity, really, its origins were this strike, the Great Flint Sit-Down Strike. That's my quick overview, and now my wonderful colleague Rebecca Engel will have more to say on this, on how the piece got started. Rebecca?
Yeah, people ask us how did you find this story? It started with really the ground of our project is the relationship. Martin and I worked together in the Performing Arts Department at St. Mary's College. We were both on the faculty. He is the head of the music program. He is the head of the theater program. And at some point along the way, he said, you know, my fantasy is that I'm going to write an opera and you're going to direct it. So that probably would have stayed as a pleasant fantasy and never been realized. But at some point in the last 6 years ago, Marty said, I think I have a story. And as he's already told you, the minute I heard it, I said, yes, this is fabulous. Vivid events, compelling characters. I was really struck by a number of things as we began to do our research. I was really excited by the way that it's really about the power of the collective. We, from the very beginning, said this is a piece for, it's an oratorio, it's a piece of narrative music, but it's really not about the heroic individuals, it's really about collective action. So it tells a story of the power of the many to find their action, find their agency, find their voices, and stand up to what at that point, as Marty has said, was one of the great corporate powers globally already in 1937. I was also really drawn to the role that women played in the strike. As you're going to meet one of our narrator, our main character, Janora Johnson, a real true activist her entire life, and really inspiring. So also you'll meet Frances Perkins, who was the first woman to serve on the president's cabinet. She was the Secretary of Labor under FDR. So I was drawn to the role that women played in the strike. And finally, I really resonated with the setting, Flint. 6-7 years ago, Flint had already been in the news. I said, Flint it's a wound on the national psyche. We all feel what's happening in Flint, and it moves us and it speaks to us. And we say that could be my city. It's continued to be in the news, and we couldn't have known 6 or 7 or 8 years ago that it would continue to be as powerful an example of what can go wrong and why there really needed to be collective action. So at some point you heard me saying, oh, it's an opera, and I'm a director by training, and I began to just imagine scenes and characters like crazy. And we made a really prudent early decision to shift our focus to an oratorio. As the maestro said, it is also a narrative form, but it's less reliant on visual storytelling, although I hope that we will have some, because there's a really rich visual archive related to this topic. But we really, once we began to move past the research, we were really thinking of it from the beginning as an oratorio. So with that, I think we're ready to turn it over to Professor Peter Cole. Am I there? Are we right? Anne, are you with us on our timeline? I think that's right. Yes? Ready to introduce Dr. Peter Cole, who is a labor historian, to the marvels of Zoom. He is joining us from the Midwest, where he is a professor of history, and he can add to his bio if he wants to set the stage a little bit. But Peter's work is really in 1930s labor politics, and so we really are honored to have somebody with his depth of scholarship to just set the stage a little bit for us about the Flint strike specifically.
Hi there, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to, so I think that everyone can hear me okay, and I'll be getting started in my brief presentation. Thank you very much to Rebecca for reaching out to me, and it's an honor to be with all of you here this afternoon, even though I'm in Macomb, Illinois, where it's actually pleasantly cool, unlike the sweltering fires of California. Right. So I'm here. I was asked to speak about the Flint sit-down strike, and it's my pleasure to do so. Like Professor Engel said, I'm a labor historian. You don't get to meet those people very often, and there's not so many of us. So we all know the basic story, right? In 1929, the Great Depression began. That means that in late 1936, when the Flint sit-down strike began, the Depression had been going on for over 7 years. Yeah. And Americans around the country, some more than others, but in rural America, the famous image of Walker Evans at the top, and urban Americans had been suffering, right? And as a result of this, and after 4 years of inaction under Hoover, the New Deal starting in 1933 started to make some changes. But the truth is that a lot of people still were intensely suffering. Unemployment was high, poverty was high, really the highest level in the industrial era. As a result of that, a growing number of Americans started to make demands on their government in order to essentially make their country and their lives better. That included, if not limited to, workers in many workplaces around the country going on strike in order to make demands, most obviously for a raise, but also for many other reasons. In 1934, for example, there was the largest wave of strikes the country had seen up until that point, including in San Francisco, where dock workers shut down the port of San Francisco, then the largest port on the West Coast, and every other port up and down the coast in what became known as the Big Strike of 1934. Literally for 6 weeks, not a single port on the West Coast was shipping anything in or out. And after that strike, actually, there was a huge victory for the workers. There was also massive strikes that year in Minneapolis, and Toledo, Ohio, and other places. The year following, in 1935, the federal government, Congress and the president passed a law that basically, for the first time in the history of the country, gave workers the right to form unions and to legally go on strike, and obligated employers to negotiate with those workers for a contract. Also in this moment comes a lot of union organizing, and literally born out of the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, came a new federation of unions that were considered more militant and more left-wing, and that was called the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations. This federation basically was trying to organize industries that previously had been untouched by unions, including steel, meatpacking, and auto. The United Auto Workers of America was one, in other words, of the founding unions of the CIO. Why were auto workers so interested in forming unions? The answer is that auto workers suffered tremendously on the job and off the job. First of all, even if you had a job, you didn't have a job that lasted 12 months a year by any means. It was very common, and I should say still is common in manufacturing, for layoffs to happen, often for months at a time. So technically you have a job, but actually you don't have a job. And if you're not working in the plant, you're not getting paid, right? And so first of all, there was a lot of layoffs, and those were really hard on workers. The discipline of foremen was very tough. And most basically, the speed of the work, the assembly line, was brutal, right? It could drive someone insane. And so if any of you have seen the classic film by Charlie Chaplin, Modern Times, there's a scene in it, famously, where Charlie Chaplin goes insane while working on an assembly line and sucked into this sort of outsized version of an assembly line, right? And so auto workers were hardly the only workers suffering, but they had a lot of grievances. Their particular target of auto workers in the UAW was General Motors. Now, although Ford Motor Company was more important in the establishment of the auto industry, GM had surpassed Ford in the 1920s and 30s to become the larger of the two biggest auto manufacturers in the country. Led by Alfred Sloan, General Motors became incredibly large, incredibly profitable, even in 1936, making nearly $300 million, right? And incredibly anti-union. One congressional committee said that basically they had the most sophisticated super spy network to undermine unions of any company in America. And even though a law had been passed, General Motors refused to accept that workers had the right to form unions and assumed at some future point that somehow this law was going to disappear. Now, although auto manufacturing is in many places, throughout the Detroit area, famously, Flint, say about an hour north of Detroit, was very much an auto town in the early 20th century and into the late 20th century for that matter. But Flint was very much a so-called company town. What does that mean is that essentially a single company dominates the town, right? Many public officials, including the mayor and the city council, were paid by General Motors. The police were paid by General Motors. The local media was paid by General Motors. The local school officials were paid by General Motors, in addition to the actual auto workforce, right? And having near total control of the town, right? When the UAW organizer of the Flint action checked into a hotel, within minutes of arriving, he receives an anonymous phone call saying, if you don't leave town quick, you'll leave in a wooden box, right? And so that was General Motors' response to auto workers' attempts to unionizing in 1936. So famously, with that backdrop, at the very end of the year, auto workers occupied the factory, as was described briefly earlier. Although actually sit-down tactics had been first used by the industrial workers of the world in 1906 in General Electric's factories in Schenectady, New York, and although they were also used a little earlier in the 30s, this becomes the best known and most influential sit-down action of the 30s, right? Like was explained earlier, rather than as normal going on strike and leaving the factory, instead you occupy the factory. That's brilliant on multiple levels because it, in short, prevents the company from continuing to operate, right? And the whole purpose of a strike is to deny employers money, right? Because hypothetically, and I believe really, companies listen to one thing, money, right? And so if they're not getting any, they might talk. But if they continue to operate the factory with replacement workers, AKA strike breakers, maybe they won't talk, right? Now we have to be mindful that this occupation is illegal, right? That they didn't have the right to stay in the factory. They don't own the factory. The fact that thousands of workers are willing to occupy is evidence of the militancy of these workers and more broadly of the era. And so another key component of this action was that rather than strike lots of factories across all of GM, instead you only strategically strike a few, right? Including GM's Fisher body plant. The body or chassis of a car is being manufactured in these plants. And many models of GM cars basically depended upon this factory, right, for their parts. As also was mentioned earlier, women played a crucial role in this strike for many reasons. The most obvious is that the men are on the inside. And so women, wives, daughters, mothers, sisters, friends, are the ones basically on the outside. They're the ones who are essentially protecting the plant from invasion from security. They're the ones who are providing food and other essential ingredients for workers who are living in the factory and never leave. They're the face, actually, also of the strike and proved essential in many other ways. The governor of Michigan made an important choice early in the strike as well. Generally speaking, police and National Guard have been used in American labor history to break strikes, not to aid strikers. Murphy technically was being neutral when he brought in National Guard to protect these workers from attacks from private security, but neutral is actually pro-worker considering the context of American history and American workplace history, right? And so Murphy, who was a supporter of the New Deal, went on to become a Supreme Court justice under President Roosevelt, proved an important ally. After 44 days on strike, right, General Motors recognized UAW. We should note that, again, they shouldn't have had to have gone on strike to recognize a union, but employers are often very anti-union. And the United Auto Workers overnight had organized, you might say, the most powerful, wealthiest private corporation in America, right? And so overnight, you might say, hundreds of thousands of workers suddenly were members of a single union. That would be like if today Walmart went union and suddenly you have a million plus workers in a new organization. Now the tactic of the sick town has a longer history beyond. Many workers copied this tactic because they saw it was effective. And it doesn't just mean manufacturing workers. These women who worked at a Woolworths, right, in Detroit also could use a sit-down tactic for the same ends, to get a union, to get a raise, et cetera. And by the late 1940s and early 1950s, UAW had become the largest, most powerful union in the country. So too, 1 in 3 American workers were in unions at that time, the largest percentage of workers in unions in American history, right? And as was also mentioned, with unionization came essentially rising working class into the middle class, right? And so why, for instance, are there fewer Americans in the middle class today? It tracks almost exactly to the decline of unionism. Yeah, and so what we see is that the Flint sit-down strike, and more broadly, the rise of this powerful progressive union, the UAW, as part of the CIO, dramatically improved the lives of those workers, dramatically changed the course of the nation, and dramatically benefited millions and millions of American workers as a result of the Flint sit-down strike. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
Thank you so much, Peter. I know people may have questions. We're going to have a question and answer period towards the end of the program. So Peter, if you can hang out with us a little longer. People might have questions regarding your presentation, but now we'll take it back to Marty and Rebecca.
We're going to talk a little bit. I think you're probably getting pretty excited to hear some music. We want to just give you a quick snapshot of our creative project, of our creative process, I mean to say. I didn't mention at the beginning, but Marty and I are both from Michigan. My grandfather was an auto worker. His grandmother was a labor organizer. So we had a kind of a very Michigan-centric relationship. And early on in our process, we went back to the archives. I think in a period of 7 or 8 days, we visited something like 6 or 7 archives. And this project is really rooted in the documents that we unearthed, which included a diary that was written by one of the workers who was in the strike, who wrote a diary entry. You're going to hear an aria from based on that text. We discovered a fabulous trove of letters written by the husbands to their wives. There's a whole section that's based on that. And so we really came back from that 8-day research trip with lots of primary documents, lots of primary sources, voices, telegrams to the governor saying these commies need to be kicked out of the plants no matter what, et cetera, et cetera. You can only imagine. It was really inspiring. And that was very near the beginning of our process. We've continued to work from primary documents, meaning first-person accounts, but we've also used them with a certain amount of creative license. So we'll maybe give you some specific examples of that as we talk about the pieces. Marty, is there anything else you want to add about our creative process before we start to introduce the first piece of music?
Well, it's been enormous. I'll just say it has been enormous, and we don't have time to explain the whole thing. We did a lot of research. We looked at oratorios together. I would give Rebecca assignments like listen to these pieces of music, watch these opera scenes, and she would give me dramatic assignments. We would discuss it. We would find wonderful text, but then it was Rebecca's job to shape it into something singable. I'll give one hypothetical example, and then we'll move on. If you find some great text and it says, these union demands are absolutely unacceptable, that is not a singable thing. You can't sing those words. So it was Rebecca's job to find words that could be shaped into something that singers could actually sing. It's been a joyous but very arduous process these few years. And why don't we just move on to actually hearing the music? And then I would like to thank, we have most of the musicians you'll be hearing and seeing zooming in with us today. And by the interest of fate, they actually are residents of Omaha and nearby. And there was a beautiful concert hall with a lovely grand piano that was empty because of the pandemic. And so I must say, we must thank the singers, Derek Fox and Sharon Campbell, and Taylor Staten, and the pianist, Stacy Hainline. And Stacy also organized, she not only played piano, she organized all of this. And they did this during a pandemic when things could potentially not be so safe. And they rehearsed with great enthusiasm while masked or via Zoom rehearsals or keeping their distance. It was a real challenge for them. And we are very grateful. You're about to hear them. You're going to hear 2 excerpts from the oratorio. And this first one, as Rebecca said, is an aria by the striker, the sit-downer who wrote the diary, one of my favorite treasures that we found during our research trip. The striker's name is Francis O'Rourke, and he's a man I've come to really admire so much. And in fact, his daughter and granddaughter and great-nephew are zooming in right now from Texas and New York. And they've been in touch with us, and we're grateful. And we've been in touch with other descendants of the strikers as well, and that's been very inspiring. This diary, this aria you're about to hear is just called Well, Mr. Diary, and that is the first entry in the diary, the first note of the strike. He says, well, Mr. Diary, here we are. And the wonderful tenor, Taylor Staten, will be singing. To me, it possesses a poignancy of what it just like for one of the workers, one of those sit-downers saying, wow, we've taken on this enormous task and we're gonna do it. We just can't lose. We can't bear to lose. We can't afford to lose. It's an unbearable thought, so we're sticking this out. From that, I think we can just go right into the diary. You'll see the text as subtitles underneath.
Yes, lots of clapping. Marty and I were on the rehearsal call. We were really beyond thrilled, beyond moved. In a piece of narrative music, one of the things that you can do is to really go deeply inside an individual's emotions, their thought process, and an aria like a Shakespeare soliloquy is a perfect vehicle for that. But we also have scenes that are about confrontation, about the relationships, about power that's being negotiated, and the oratorio moves back and forth between the kinds of elevated musical expressions that are more intimate or personal in nature, private thoughts, to really more public speech. This next scene that I'm introducing is something that really happened. This is based directly on an account in Frances Perkins, in her biography. Frances Perkins, as I mentioned, is the first woman labor secretary. She was appointed in FDR's second term. She was a labor organizer, labor activist. Before that, it was obviously her work that brought her to that recognition and that place of responsibility. And as the strike began, FDR set far back out of sight, but he was working behind the scenes, and his labor secretary, Madam Perkins, tried repeatedly to negotiate, using her soft power, tried to negotiate a settlement between General Motors and the leaders of the strike. She failed several times. It was the battle was kind of being played out in the press with sound bites. This duet, which you're about to hear, takes place in the evening as a phone call between Frances Perkins, who's at home, and receives a call from Alfred Sloan. The two of them have met earlier in the day, and she thinks that the discussion has gone quite well. She's feeling quite optimistic. By now, the strike is really dragged on over 30 days. And so she's really hungry to kind of bring Sloan finally to get him to accept the union. So this is based on a true account. And I'll just add that in the course of it, Sloan really kind of snapped out and repeated about 25 times, "I'm Alfred Sloan, I'm worth 70 million, you can't talk to me like that." So we've captured some of the both public face and also the private thoughts of these two powerful people in this confrontation. Do you want to mention the names of the singers, Marty, just one more time to thank you?
If I may, the mezzo soprano is, let me see, am I muted? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. If the mezzo soprano is Sharon Campbell, the baritone is Derek Fox, and again, the pianist is Stacy Hainline. I'll just add one thing to what Rebecca said. Although they had a meeting, Sloan and Perkins had a meeting earlier that day, and it had seemed to go well. After the fact, Sloan regretted revealing some flexibility, and he was calling her to back off. And this was very frustrating for Perkins. I'll just say something about the very last line. This is about a 2-minute scene. Oakland Symphony, first of all, I'll say two things. You're seeing singers with a piano right now, but rest assured, when the piece is performed in its entirety, it will be the Oakland Symphony and not a single pianist, with Maestro Morgan conducting. The last line was not from the historical record, like almost, I would say 99% of the text is from the historical record. And I was telling the wonderful, talented choral director of the Oakland Symphony, Lynn Morrow, about the story. We were discussing it, and I was letting her in on it, and I was telling her about this scene specifically. And it had not yet been written. And when I told her the part that Alfred Sloan at the end is saying, "You can't talk to me like that, I'm worth 70 million, I made it all myself, I made every penny myself," Lynn says to me, he didn't make it by himself. He made it off the backs of those men. And Rebecca and I thought, that is such a great line. It's actually better than what Francis really said. So we took a little dramatic license and we changed the last line. So that comes from Oakland Symphony Choral Director Lynn Morrow. Thank you, Lynn. And now let's watch the scene.
I have never in my life discussed serious business matters with a woman, Madame Perkins. I've decided I won't meet with any representatives of labor in Michigan or anywhere. My attorneys have already begun legal action to have the strikers removed.
As you're aware, Mr. Sloan, workers invited into a workplace by their employers when they are hired may not be found guilty of trespass by the courts.
Those trespassers have no rights. Whatever it takes, I will see them removed.
I really don't like Alfred Sloan. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us, Mr. Sloan.
I will not bargain while strikers illegally process our bloods.
The problem is, Mr. Sloan, you've never once used your mind to wrestle with a moral problem or any problem except making more money.
You can't talk to me like that.
You don't deserve to be counted among decent men.
You can't talk to me like that. I'm worth 17 million, and I made it all myself.
Have you heard about the rich man trying to get into heaven?
17 million.
He's like a camel trying to pass through the eye of a needle.
I am Alfred P. Salon, worth 17 million, and I made every penny myself. 17 million, and I made it all myself.
Not by yourself. You made it on the backs of those men.
Thank you again for those fabulous musical performances from our
Yes,
guest collaborators.
we are so grateful to those singers and all the work they put in at the height of the social distancing period.
Yes, thank you so much. That was just fantastic. And we're so appreciative that you were able to put these videos together for us on fairly short notice. So now we'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. What was it like for you guys to hear it performed for the first time, to hear these excerpts?
It's such a thrill. I cannot tell you. A composer works in lonely isolation. We hum to ourselves a lot. We plink a few notes out the piano or the guitar. Our computer spits out these horribly robotic little sounds. And then it's nerve-wracking. Somebody said to me once, a musician said, "Are you nervous before a performance?" I said, "No, but I'm always nervous, and I always will be before the very first rehearsal of a new piece." And it is such a relief and a pleasure when you hear musicians of this caliber, and you also hear that your piece seems to work pretty well. And anyway, incredible gratitude, and I will say, relief.
We did get a question on the chat from Margaret. How close are you to completion?
99%. Go ahead, Rebecca.
I have a different percentage, but yes, we are moving towards the finish line. The finish line is in view.
How long will the total piece run?
Under 90 minutes.
Under 90, which was the absolute max Michael set for us. And we're thinking probably an hour and 10 or an hour and a quarter. from start to finish. Oratorios are generally shorter than operas, which is not a bad thing.
A couple of people have noted the irony of having Alfred Sloan sung by a black singer. Touche.
A, it's a workshop, and B, it's very Hamilton.
Right.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we're not going to hear an oratorio expecting a documentary. And I think there's a layer of richness that's added by recognizing that we live in Oakland in the 21st century, that we are in the 21st century, and that the we who are telling the story is quite different. In fact, the Flint strikers were almost entirely white. There were a few people of color, and the transformation of the auto industry was yet to happen. But Flint, I think it's an appropriate and an exciting choice, and
It's also a really good singer.
yeah, and we couldn't have asked for a better Alfred Sloan. So thank you to Derek.
Yeah. I see a question. I wonder, well, there's a few questions. How will the chorus, a few are referring to the chorus. How will the chorus work into the piece? What part will they play? It's a very important part.
Yeah.
And there are individual, Rebecca, do you want to answer this?
Sure.
Go ahead.
The chorus will be really important, and they will be stepping in and out of being the workers, being the workers' wives. Just some of them will play GM management, but we're thinking of this as really being, how do we tell the story of a town? How do we tell the story from the point of view of the people? And so the chorus are not kind of, I'm thinking of like a traditional opera, the peasants in the background who come in and then leave the stage to the action of the main characters, but they will really be a force and a presence. They will obviously voice the workers, but also voice GM management and other smaller ensembles. We'll have a number of small ensembles that will emerge out of the chorus and feed back into it. At least that's where we are right now with our work.
I see someone has typed a question, which I think is directed for me as the composer. Can you talk about the process of composing a piece like this for symphony? What were your goals? What was the thought process? And the quick answer is I can hardly capture the thought process. If you think writing for an orchestra is hard, quadruple it. Just quadruple how hard you think it is. If you think, was it easier or not so easy to write that phrase of music, however hard you might think it is, quadruple the labor. And that might give you a sense of it. It was hard, but at the same time, I just love writing for orchestra. Picture an immense playground for a composer. I've written lots of trios and duets, but an orchestra is a playground. And when it's a group as wonderful as Oakland Symphony, where really a composer can do anything they want, and the symphony can bring it off, it's really a pleasure. At the same time, it's very humbling. I feel the weight of history on me when I write for orchestra. The greatest musical artists in human history have written for this orchestra. And who am I to venture in? Well, I do it, but I consider all the great composers and a lot of new composers my teachers. So I study lots of scores, opera scores, symphony scores. I could give you a long list, and it's a labor of love. It's not painful homework. And I might stop. If you would watch me as I study, you might see me pausing at various points and say, why pause there? That was a fairly trivial moment. And I might be thinking, why did Stravinsky make the viola's harmonics right there and then stop? Or why did Rachmaninoff add the flutes there? And then, I'm looking at little tiny details, and I'm letting all the great composers be my teacher and hoping for the best.
I have a question. Peter shared some really wonderful photographs in his PowerPoint, and there are many evocative Depression era and 1930s photographs that relate to this. are you thinking at all of a sort of multimedia component to this, where we have visuals? And I realize it's not staged, but Rebecca, you're the
Yeah. Yes, I'm the director in the family. Yes. Really, that was Maestro Morgan's, one of his initial responses was that this would be an opportunity to really incorporate some of the visual archives. There's newsreel footage. This was an international story within, within weeks of the start of the strike. It was an international story. There's newsreel footage, photographs, audio recordings, really a really wonderful trove of visual elements. So one of the things that we are hoping to achieve is an added layer that will enrich this. We certainly are using titles, not just for the sung libretto, but also in some cases to move the action forward, the way you would use titles in a film where you say, 7 years later, ... In other words, we need to sometimes move the action forward with the audience's understanding. It's not so interesting to have somebody singing in recitative, and then on day 37, the judge ordered blah, blah, like that. We want to just be able to kind of quickly drop some new information to the audience. So we'll be using title cards and hopefully photographs and film as a visual layer in the piece. There's also been some discussion about gesturing in the direction of costumes. I understand that the open chorus, the open symphony chorus, has been known to appear in costume. We certainly don't picture them wearing, formal concert wear. They're playing working people in the 1930s at the height of the Depression. So there'll be some visual storytelling as well.
Great. Well, we have brought this in just about an hour. So thank you so much. This has been, unless anybody has any further questions, you might quickly type something in. But otherwise, thank you all so much for being with us today. I wanted to make mention, Mieko did type this into the chat, but if you'd like to hear more Marty Rokeach, we just released on Friday evening an archival audio of the Piccolo Concerto on our website. So it's under the tab Virtual Performances. We've been recording this presentation, and we'll also make that available. And I'd like to also just introduce Dr. Mieko Hatano, our executive director, to take us home. So thank you so much. Mieko?
Hello, everyone. It is so good to see so many of you, as Michael said at the beginning here. We miss you all. We miss being with you. We miss doing performances live and in person with you. But you all continue to sustain us through this unprecedented time. Your coming together with us here is a real testament to that. We look forward to doing more of these types of opportunities to bring you all together. And we hope that you're able to stay cool and safe somewhere today in this very, very hot day. But again, none of this could ever be done without all of you, your continued support. And we just really look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Rebecca and Marty and Derek and Sharon and Stacy for your just incredible talent and artistry. And we're just so honored in Oakland that you would bring a story that is so relevant to all of us to our orchestra. So thank you so much and look forward to working with you some more soon. And any last things or?
No.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a
Thank
pleasure.
you all. It was
Bye.
great to be with you.
Thank you.
Oh, and Bruce, thank you so much, and the rest of staff as
Yes.
well. This was our first foray. Thank you.
Great.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yes. Thank you.